Every year, during Halloween, old scary stories like the legend of the terrifying Candyman resurface. It's the legend of the man who supposedly stands by his door on Halloween night handing out poisoned candy and chocolates to children. But is this really just a story? When it gets dark and kids go door to door with their bag, it's exactly when a horrifying person has been waiting for them for a long time. He stands in front of a house decorated for Halloween on a dark alley with a cold face and a scary look, watching his surroundings. The first child steps into his yard and the man quietly extends a basket full of candy and chocolates. Giving a strange smile, what no one knows is that all the candy is poisoned and the man's smile means death is near. You might say it's all just a myth, a scary story that gets revived every Halloween. But one night in 1974, this myth became real. On Halloween night in Texas, a little boy was poisoned by candy he received from a man. That night, the fate of several children was about to change, but unlike the myths, the Candyman wasn't a stranger. He was someone nobody expected. The story begins on October 31st. It was an ordinary Halloween night in a small town in Texas. The weather was a bit cold and it was starting to rain. The streets were full of children, excited and laughing, dressed in scary costumes, going from house to collect candy. Timothy O'Brien, an 8-year-old boy, was just like many other children that night, wandering the dark and rainy streets with his 2-year younger sister, Elizabeth. They were ready to fill their small bags with candy. Their father, Ronald, a 30-year-old man who worked as an optician, was accompanying them to keep an eye on them. Their neighbor, Jim Bates, and his little daughter had also joined them. Together, they went from house to house in the rainy weather. The rain intensified, so the group decided to only visit houses on 2 streets. When they arrived at one house, its lights were off and there were no signs of life. Jim and his daughter stayed on the sidewalk, assuming no one was home, but Ronald, Timothy, and Elizabeth went to the door and knocked. The sound of knocking echoed through the quiet street, but there was no response. The kids, eager to get to the other houses, turned back towards Jim and his daughter. Just as they were about to leave, Ronald lagged behind. A few moments later, he returned with a smile on his face, saying someone was home and had given them expensive candy, 5 pixie sticks, a popular and pricey treat at the time. He handed 1 to Timothy, 1 to Elizabeth, and 2 to Jim's children. The 5th pixie sticks was given to a boy Ronald had seen returning from church. Everything seemed normal, exciting. The kids were thrilled to have collected a lot of candy, especially the special and expensive ones. Night fell, and everyone returned home. Timothy and Elizabeth were getting ready for bed, still excited from the night's events. Before going to sleep, Timothy, full of excitement, asked his father if he could eat one of the candies. Ronald, feeling sympathetic, smiled calmly and said, "Sure, why not? Choose one." Timothy picked the pixie sticks but struggled to open it. Seeing this, Ronald sat on bed and opened the candy for him. The mysterious candy that Timothy eagerly ate that night soon turned into a nightmare. After his father opened the pixie sticks, Timothy took a bite and immediately tasted something bitter and unpleasant. groaning. He told his brother it tasted strange, like it was spoiled. Ronald, seemingly unconcerned, suggested he drink some soda to wash it down. He gave Timothy a cold soda, and Timothy swallowed the bitter candy with it. He might have thought the bitterness was due to melted sugar, but no one knew that the bitterness was a sign of something much deadlier. Only a few minutes later, everything changed drastically. Timothy clutched his stomach in pain, his eyes wide with agony, and struggled to breathe. His lips trembled, and cold sweat formed on his forehead. With a pale face, he collapsed and began vomiting. His parents, alarmed, rushed to help him, but Timothy continued to writhe in pain. Severe convulsions began, and his small body shook uncontrollably. It was clear that something terrible was happening. Ronald, now frozen with worry, hurriedly took his son to the hospital, but everything ended much sooner than they expected. Timothy died on the way to the hospital before the doctors could do anything. The doctor's announcement that Timothy had passed away hit the O'Brien family like a bullet to the heart. It had been just over an hour since Timothy had eaten that cursed candy, but to them it felt like the world had stopped in an instant. Around 10 p.m., with Timothy's parents were still in shock and grief at the hospital, the doctors noticed a strong, pungent smell cloning coming from Timothy's mouth. Smell reminiscent of bitter almonds. The doctors, familiar with the terrifying sign of candy poisoning, immediately contacted the police, and the police quickly responded. The police informed the prosecutor, who was responsible for handling the issue in Deer Park, and he quickly arrived at the hospital. The first thing the prosecutor heard from the medical examiner confirmed the nightmare. Timothy had been poisoned with candy. The smell of bitter almonds indicates the sinister plot was a clear sign of candy poisoning. Candy, also known as potassium candy, is a deadly poison that smells like bitter almonds that quickly kills by preventing oxygen from reaching the body. Candy is one of the most lethal substances known, capable of cutting off breathing and killing the victim within minutes. The poison was so potent that even if Timothy had consumed half of the amount, it would still have been fatal. The medical examiner, while informing the rest of the police team, revealed that the first 5 centimeters of the Pixie Sticks candy were filled with candy crystals. Someone had carefully opened the package, inserted the poison, and then released it with something like a staple. The autopsy results uncovered the horrifying truth: the amount of candy in a Mount Tipsy's body could have killed 2 grown men. This tragic event spread like wildfire through Deer Park. People looked at the candy their children had collected with horror. They were all terrified, snatching the candy bags from their children's hands. Who could do such a thing? Who could be as cruel as to put deadly poison in Halloween candy? The nightmare had just begun, and the police quickly set to work to find out who was behind this deadly crime. On Halloween, kids dress up in scary costumes and go door to door to collect candy. When they knock on doors, they say trick or treat, meaning give us candy or we'll play a trick on you. If someone doesn't give them candy, the kids might play a harmless prank. This tradition started years ago and has become one of the main parts of Halloween celebrations. Kids love going out with their friends and collecting lots of candies. Back behind the prison doors, some of the 200 people gathered. They were holding pixie sticks in their hands, shouting in memory of Timothy, the little boy who lost his life because of poisoned candy. This crowd wasn't just another protest, it had turned into a terrifying memorial for a little boy. But this wasn't the end of Ronald O'Brien's story. The horrific legacy of the man who killed the joy of Halloween still lives on. The reputation of the man who poisoned children with candies is still talked about in the streets and cities of America, and this fear remains in people's minds. Many families now take candy from their children and check it first to make sure there's nothing dangerous in it. The fear of the candy man still exists. Although Timothy O'Brien was the only boy who lost his life because of Halloween candy, his death wasn't caused by a stranger but by his own father, who did it out of greed and for money. This truly created a painful and terrifying story. For similar videos, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next cases.